welcome to AWS Made Easy. We're here in our studio. We call it Studio 2.3. We've iterated on the design of it. And so this want to introduce Keith Hodo. Keith is a partner solutions architect with AWS, and we actually met via a LinkedIn comment. So I posted that I was at AWS waiting in the lobby, and you said, go grab a coffee. And we never actually made that work that day.
Right.
But we got to talking. I really enjoyed a lot of what you were posting. And yeah, I had a great conversation downtown and really enjoyed your perspective on what being a partner solutions architect is about bringing larger enterprises through a cloud journey. So really looking forward to this conversation. But first, I want to thank you for being here, and everyone who comes to our in-person studio gets something. I want to give you these some of our CloudFix swag. These are
cool.
Gooder sunglasses, and they actually have a Raul's avatar as the case, so it's kind of cool.
Oh, that's fantastic. I did just actually pick up a piece of swag a couple weeks ago and was wearing it yesterday, where I got some Rudy Chetty socks.
You know, one time at a conference, I forgot some socks, and I ran around looking for one. I said, okay, I need a quick demo because I really just need a pair of socks.
So for those that don't know who Rudy is yet, he's I believe, principal solutions architect these days.
Okay.
And you'll see him at a lot of our conferences. So he does some broadcasting from reInvent, and his personality is just fantastic.
Oh, cool.
Thank you both, Stephen and Rahul, for having me. And my name is Keith Hodo. I'm a partner solutions architect at AWS, working with Deloitte as my partner. And then from a industry perspective, I cover technology, media, and telco. And due to some of the personnel changes that we've had recently, I now cover United States and Canada as my geo. So that's been really fun.
So what brought you to AWS? I know it's been, what's your journey in tech generally?
Yeah, so I'm going to take you all the way back, right? I graduated from University of Washington in 2006 with degrees in journalism and political science, and started at another hyperscaler literally the following Monday, working on doing manual updates of their phone OS. And then I spent about 10 months there working as a test engineer, and then transitioned to a nonprofit that was doing cancer research as part of the phase 2 and phase 3 of drug studies and trials. Those ultimately need to be independently done. So that was a service that we offered, and I started there as a test engineer again, and then moved into software engineering, and then did enterprise software engineering as a consultant for, about 11 years, and worked my way up through the ranks there, where ultimately I was a group manager and running teams of teams. And then I wanted to try something different, and some of my colleagues from that consultancy had come over to AWS. I reached out to ultimately just reconnect, and then they said, hey, I have an opening on my team. Would you like to go through the loop? And it started me off on this journey that I've been on for almost 10 months. And it's been fantastic. Being at AWS, being on the inside, to me is almost like being a kid in a candy store, because to date, I've tried to dive deeper into my passion areas. So that is serverless, security, and then builder tools. And then I've been working on certifications to kind of round that out so I can be deeper in different areas. Right now I'm studying to earn my AWS certified specialist in databases. And then my plan is every 3 months, I'm just going to add on another certification to add that depth. My role is ultimately to help our partner to take the opportunities that they have from the prospect phase into qualified. But it goes a lot deeper than that, right? So if you're just thinking about what becomes something that's qualified, it's now Deloitte is looking at the deal and the opportunity as something that they can go out and win, right? There may be competition. So depending on the deal size and the need of the partner, then I can help them, continue to refine that architecture, respond to an RFP, et cetera. But again, like going back to what the primary role is more just trying to move something through the funnel just into that qualified phase. And then like my KPIs that I'm ultimately measured against, we do what's called external content. So that's where you see, AWS with the prolific amount of blog posts. I have been working with our training and certification team and going on Twitch. Right now we're going through Cloud Essentials and I'm on air for that. So that's been a just awesome opportunity. And then we also do partner enablements. And I'm trying to drive those deeper. So a partner enablement can be a workshop, a game day, a jam, any of the above that we run for Deloitte to get them up to speed or dive deeper on a given technology. And where I ultimately want to go is let's bring the power of both of us, of AWS and of Deloitte, and bring these to our customers, right? Because when we can deliver those game days directly to the customer, they learn a lot more. They get an opportunity to see the depth of our technology, and then they can apply that into their day jobs, or at least even like bookmark it if that's not where they're at right now on their journey. And then last but not least, again, going back to that primary function of the role that I was talking about, we're there to also support in those opportunities.
Got it. Well, so it's really when you work with one partner, in this case Deloitte, and so they will have a project that they want to do for one of their clients, and they'll come to you and say, "Hey, we need some help figuring out how to do this." What are the kind of, I guess, without maybe going into as much detail as you want, but what are the kind of projects that they do?
We're thinking of enterprise, and the focus is on the Fortune 500.
Got it.
Right? So when you're thinking about that, it can be anything from, we just identified someone that's beginning their cloud journey. So maybe they're migrating their first workload, all the way into the most recent thing that I worked on that I absolutely loved was we needed to connect the customer's call center that is hosted on AWS and then build out an event-driven architecture so that ultimately for their call centers, this customer wanted to have real-time telemetry and data of the utilization of their call center agents, and then to be able to see, like who's busy, what are the outcomes. And so we're going to help them to deliver those events, and then ultimately Deloitte will help them build those dashboards, and they'll be able to see that in real time.
So looking at the different clients that you face, it's really interesting. So they're Fortune 100, large enterprises. What do you see in terms of cloud maturity, cloud readiness? What's the general approach that you're seeing? Are they hesitant? Do they know that it's coming, or just trying to jump in with both feet? What are you seeing?
Honestly, it's a very wide variety, even within different enterprises, and even within that range of the Fortune 500. So we see some customers that are really nascent in their cloud journey, and that's where I remind myself and remind my colleagues of something that I learned very early in my career, all the way back when I was testing that mobile OS, is I really try to bring it back to a fresh perspective every single day, right? At Amazon, we call that our day one culture, so that we can really be empathetic and understanding to where someone is in that journey. I also try to bring that to all of my friends and connections on LinkedIn, as well as the other social platforms that I'm on. You can find me on LinkedIn at Keith Hodo. There's one of me. It's great to have a very unique surname.
And it's going to pop up on the final edition. It'll pop up on the screen. It's popping up right now.
And my big thing is I want to have that empathy and respect for wherever they may be. What I think of is back in the mid 2010s, that's when I started my cloud journey. And what really set that mentality and the right mindset for me was I read Eugene Kim's The Phoenix Project, right? And I know that's a little bit different. It's talking about DevOps and how you can bring a whole team in with you. But that's where we were at that time, where prior to that point in time, like this was 2014, 2015, the way that we functioned would be we would have a sprint, we would deliver a piece of working software, and then kind of just like throw it over the wall. And then we would have our systems engineers that would go and do that deployment and then report back to us if there were any issues. And what we ultimately did was we invested in a lot of automation and then made it so that software engineers could do those deployments, especially into our test in UAT, and then get that fast feedback, see if our services were meeting our own expectations and metrics that we were trying to drive before we even got to that point in production. Mm-hmm. And then the biggest change that we had, again, during the mid-2010s was rather than having the service engineers always in our network operations center, they came and they sat right there with us and were a part of the team. Now, there were some days where they would have to go and do their deployments because it really did. It was a high enough sensitivity level where they had to be in the network operations center to do that. Unfortunately, I never got the opportunity to go and sit with them. But I would hear about, what they were doing and get that fast feedback, the following, say like Monday or Tuesday, once we were back in office, to then make those corrections and then incorporate that feedback as part of our ongoing efforts for development.
So if you were to put a number to what you were saying, let's use the crawl, walk, run framework that the FinOps Foundation uses. What percentage of customers do you think fall under each one of these three buckets?
Yeah, Rahul, I think it's genuinely tough to come up with a percentage because it varies even within your organization. So what I would say is when we're thinking about, let's even just take the workload migration, right? What we're trying to think of when we migrate that workload is what is important to get that workload working in AWS. We don't want to make it so that you're ultimately just doing a lift and shift of your data center, right? Because when you do that, you're going to end up with what my colleague called your mess for more. One of the things that I will bring up is a couple months ago, my colleague shared a survey that was done, and one of the most important things in the minds of the C-suite this year is how do we do that cost optimization, right? 80% of respondents came back and said that cost is their top priority in 2023. And then 79% said that security was their top priority, right? So we have a number 1A and a number 1B. and they're separated by 1 percentage point. I think this is a huge year for all of us to think about, do you have the right data to run your workloads in AWS? And are you optimizing for your compute? Are you optimizing for the network and the balance and the needs of your applications? And that's where we're going to realize those cost savings for our customers.
Tell me about what anti-patterns you see on the ground.
Yeah. I'm not seeing a lot of anti-patterns myself, just because of what I've been focusing on, which is mostly net new work. So we're optimizing for that from the go. What I could say is, for the customers that are beginning that journey or early on and in those early stages, we do have tooling to then understand what the compute needs, what the data store needs are going to be of your workloads, so that we can right size that from day one. And then there are additional complexities that come into that based on the availability needs of your application, as well as the resiliency, right? So we think about things like RPO and RTO, because as Werner Vogel said, everything fails all of the time. And we need to be ready for those failures, so that, if we're thinking about, FinOps and something like that, your application needs to have uptime, right? When that application isn't up, you're most likely losing money. If you think about a retailer, for example, being out of service can be, millions of dollars a minute or even more. So those are some considerations that we do ask our customers to think about. And that's all part of our shared responsibility.
Well, especially from that partnership perspective, right, where they may have SLAs that they need to meet, that then that responsibility trickles down to Deloitte and to you. And so having to make sure that you can address that in a way that everyone feels comfortable.
Exactly, right? And that, again, that just goes back to our shared responsibility principle, so that they will have that uptime and that resiliency for those workloads.
Got it.
So we are all about stories over here, Keith. We all have our horror stories. We have our war stories. We have our scars to kind of, share over here. But tell me about an example of something that a customer implemented while moving to AWS that truly was a game changer for them. Sometimes for a lot of these organizations, this move to the cloud becomes transformational. It changes the culture of the org. It changes the way they think about things. It changes the momentum that the organization has in the world, and especially in the highly competitive Fortune 500 group. There are 100 other companies trying to get there. So what's one example where you found a company that's found the move to AWS truly transformational?
I think one of my favorites, and this isn't a customer that I work with directly, but one of the biggest racing leagues in the world migrated all of their historical video content into AWS. And not only migrated that video. So I think that this league just turned 70 this year, and you can find a really cool blog post about who is actually their fastest driver that we did using SageMaker that just came out yesterday. Super cool article. And what's really empowering about what they did was, you're basically taking old archival footage that is somewhere on premises, and, encoding that, but then also unlocking aspects of it because you're cataloging it, and now you have the ability to go and retrieve that. So as you're thinking about a sports league, for example, you're able to go and find those highlights and put together content that would have taken, hours before, especially if you're thinking of those beautiful montages that they can run for every single race of historical footage. That can all be retrieved quickly now, and they can put together that montage that we're all used to seeing, and it's absolutely lovely.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix is AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost-saving opportunities and not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the button to start saving now.
What becomes feasible, right? Before they were just, dedicating all this time to storing these videos, making sure that, RAID is configured or whatever they need to do, but then not even taking it to the next step. Well, if these videos are already in S3, then they're one step away from being run through transcribe or any of the other detection algorithms. And then you can, like you said, pull up archival footage. If there's an interesting quote from 20 years ago that happened to be there, you can now search it with, search it with Kendra or whatever you wanted to do, right? You can now unlock a whole other level, whereas beforehand, it's not just storing it for cheaper and not owning hard drives. It's putting it into an ecosystem where more can be done with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you touched on there is you've removed the burden of the undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? And then thinking about it from a larger perspective, this is a worldwide sports league, right? So when you're thinking about that, you can not just run something through transcribe, you can also run something through translate and then create media packages that can be used not just for the locale that it was recorded for, but now you can translate that and put together a package that you can distribute throughout the world.
Now, tell us about Translate, because you had mentioned that you were really passionate about what Translate enables. So what have you seen what's your experience with that?
Yeah, and let me just start with talking a little bit about accessibility, because worldwide there are 1.3 billion people that have some sort of disability, whether that be cognitive or physical. And if we're not thinking about this from an able-bodied perspective, then we're missing out on approximately 20% of our total audience, or even 20% of our market, right? And where this came from, and getting into our translation service, a few years ago at Christmas, my wife's grandma, who at the time I believe was like 98, so she was a little bit hard of hearing, we were looking for some content to watch in the evening on a major streaming service. And so we had to pull up the closed captions. And they also have those closed captions available in a few different languages. But it's not even standardized. Yeah. So as I started looking at like different content that they had, sometimes that secondary language didn't even quite make sense, right? So like if you're thinking about a locale like the United States, then I would expect to see that secondary translation be done in Spanish and maybe Mandarin and maybe even Hindi, right?
Yeah.
Just based on the demographics of this great country, right? And then that's going to be different as you think about this being a major streaming platform that's available globally. And I think what's super powerful is as you go through that process of transcribe into translate, then you can put that back together with your content, because it's ultimately just going to be a sidecar for when you load that video through that streaming service.
Yeah.
And once you do it, it's done. And the service itself is, fairly reasonable, because how it's actually done right now, and we'll kind of get into this as I do a demo of an architecture that I built out, is the major broadcasters pay for someone to that they want to maybe do the translation from, say, English to Spanish if you're watching a live sporting event. Someone is actually going and typing out what they're hearing, right? So you do get a really high quality of product, but from what I've heard is those translation services cost something like $20 an hour. So if you think about putting this all together through something like AWS, there's a total addressable market for all of us to go out and capture of at least, I think I did the math the other day and it was like $1.5 billion. Wow. Because if you think about just like your news networks, right, and how much content they're putting out, you have the 24-hour networks, you have those live sporting events. And so every one of those can then look for that cost optimization, but then can bring in a bigger audience by then thinking about, okay, what languages do I want to translate to? And then making that available.
And you're right. Like, when you browse a video, on Prime Video or Netflix, it's always just the whims of the producer of the movie. Okay, maybe they had it done in French and maybe they didn't. And there's no standardization, but being able to put it into a pipeline where it can get translated into any of the languages that transcribe and translate support, and then again building on it with other things. I was imagining with some of the machine learning, you could eventually have a search of give me old westerns that are in Spanish that have a sappy love story, right. Something like that, right? Where you get the sentiment and the language and the translation all kind of as one stack, all because you're on AWS and your data is right there, all the stuff's accessible, and you're just plugging these pieces together.
And one caveat that I will call out is the translation, it isn't going to be 100% from day one. So there would still need to be a little bit of human interaction with that to then, polish some of the areas where the artificial intelligence doesn't quite capture, so you could run into something where it might just misinterpret a few words here and there due to whatever. But that does improve over time with utilization.
Oh, yeah. We're seeing that with ChatGPT. I'm on some of the ChatGPT forums, and people will say that an update rolled out. It can do this, where it used to miss this question, and now it can do it. And we're seeing that pace go very quickly. Actually, Raul and I were talking earlier this morning about a new feature on Textract, where they just added a new ability for certain types of IRS forms and medical forms, right? It used to stumble on there. Now it's been reinforced through a lot of feedback.
Yes, absolutely. And I do want to touch on that and say that generative AI is going to be transformative. I even from the areas that I've used it for, which I've found it gets me over the blinking cursor problem, right? So like going back to where my journey started, I always had a problem of just getting that first paragraph onto my document, and then things would start to flow from there. And what's super amazing about generative AI, especially like some of the chat applications that are out there, is I can write a prompt and it starts to shape something for me. And then I can go and personalize that. One thing I do want to call out as folks are using that is just be aware of the data that you are giving to that generative AI because of the security implications, right? It is learning from those prompts.
That makes well. That's where things like AWS, right? People have gotten in trouble copying documents into ChatGPT and asking it to do things. But with AWS, you can have your own instance of Bedrock and build a model on top of that that's tailored to your data set, where you have some understanding of the data flow, much more so than ChatGPT or some of the other web-based ones, where it's all one big pool of data.
Exactly, right? And it's awesome that you're touching on Bedrock. That service currently is in a private preview state. What I really like about how we're doing the implementation with that is that Bedrock, from the API level, is going to be an API that is called within your VPC, right? So the parameters that you give to your data will absolutely be respected, and your instance of Bedrock will not share that with other instances of Bedrock. So it will learn from what data you're feeding it, but that's your own private instance.
Got it. Coming back a little bit, Keith, to the cost optimization piece of it. Where and how have you seen the biggest bang for the buck when it comes to practices or patterns that you have seen implemented and provide huge ROIs?
Yeah, again, like for cost optimization, since I've been involved so much in what I would classify as greenfield, I haven't gotten into a lot of cost optimization for like existing customers.
But let me ask the question in a slightly different way in that context. Are there patterns that you've seen these customers implement which are great patterns to get started with, so they don't run into the pitfalls that you see other customers already in, where they're bleeding tons of money because they're just doing something very inefficiently, and these new customers with greenfield projects are doing the right thing with your guidance to implement certain things a certain way? Where do you see the biggest impact or the biggest bang for the buck in terms of the new patterns that these new age products have implemented?
Yeah, and to answer that, I think it's about being analytical and then ultimately taking the outputs of any action and then examining your results. So what I would say the biggest bang for the buck is do the analysis to make sure that you're running your workload on the right service. There are some anti-patterns that we have seen where someone will start on a particular service because they want to move
What's
fast,
an example of that?
right? And that's
what's an example of a service like that?
We had an example that recently was published out of Prime Video, where they were running long-running jobs in Lambda as part of their quality of service and then doing QA over streams. And what they ultimately found was that because it's a long-running job and you're basically going to run this all the time, they pivoted to using ECS rather than going with Lambda. And they did see cost savings from that. So where I'm going is do that analysis to make sure that you're running the right service for your application and then just iterate on it, right? It's about that circle that we think of when we think of DevOps. Always make sure that you're taking the feedback and looking at your cost to then make sure that you are running that right service for the workload.
So are there any particular ones where you implement it for a client and say, oh, we're so glad that we don't, I don't know, like with S3, right? We're so glad we don't have to maintain these big RAID arrays anymore. Or, I don't know, suppose getting off of their own authentication systems into Cognito. Like, what are people very excited about at a large scale?
I would say that the biggest thing that people are excited about right now is generative AI.
Okay, so you have lots of people asking when they're getting into the Bedrock beta.
All the time, right? So that one's going to be a huge launch when the service goes GA. One thing that I do want to touch on with the removal of that undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? So when you're thinking about what are some of those things that you used to have to do on premises that you're no longer doing once you're on AWS, right? You're not having to manage RAID arrays. You no longer have to allocate and provision for the appropriate amount of power and cooling, security in your own data center, and those things are part of the cost of AWS.
It's funny that you mentioned security, right? You're not meaning firewalls and IP filters and all that stuff. You're meaning the actual person at the door with the nightstick saying, "Don't run in here and steal our hard drives."
Exactly. And I read an article about that happened 2 weeks ago where a company found one of their hard drives on eBay.
Right.
And it still had customer data on it, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that you don't have to worry about with AWS. For example, with our Nitro systems and how we do our hard drives, when you actually remove that, then it basically destroys the hard drive itself.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So we do have some of that security functionality because of the investments that we have made into our hardware. But another thing that comes out of that is then the folks that were in those positions, they have to change, right? And believe me, I understand that change is hard, and I'm super empathetic to that. What it does mean is that we have the opportunity to upskill and learn new positions that will drive deeper value for the company.
Yep.
Right? Going back to that engineering perspective, there's always something new, a new pattern, a new language, right? So the way that I try to tell folks that are on the beginning of this cloud journey, whether I meet them through customer engagements, partner engagements, or even on LinkedIn, is I focus on two things, mind and body, right? I try to learn something new or study for at least 15 minutes a day because I think of the principle that an object in motion tends to stay in motion, right? And if I can just give myself that 15 minutes, then I keep going forward. I'm learning new things and then able to apply that back to my role.
I really like when we were talking earlier, when you're talking about meeting people where they're at and not, because we can be very deeply involved in this cloud world, but then having empathy for someone who's worked at the same place for their entire career, has experienced that the one in-house tech stack and really hasn't looked beyond it until it kind of it kind of fell in their lap.
Right.
And so that's a rough change.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of change coming out of the tech sector, within these past 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a scary time. The other thing that when I mentor, like right now we have an intern as part of our team, I'm like, make big, hairy, audacious goals, right? So try to think of something that you want to attain in that 3 to 5 year time span. I am just getting started on living by those principles because before I was a little bit more, maybe laissez-faire is not the right word, but I would just kind of go, and I was on a journey, right? Wherever the wind blew. But now I'm starting to be a lot more analytical and thoughtful and mindful about where I want to take my career, as well as the things that I want to do as I accomplish my goals.
I think it's much more.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix fixers are AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost savings opportunities and doesn't just find them. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part is that it works non-stop. See for yourself. Click on the button to get a free demonstration of CloudFix and stop overspending on.
Awesome. That's the way to be. And I know exactly what you mean. I've been in situations, points in life where it's kind of coasting, and it's always great to break out of that, especially with all the cool technology we have at our fingertips now. And like we said with generative AI, I found the same thing. It gets me out of those little ruts of, okay, how do I start? Do I really want to build this whole framework up? I just want to do this one thing. Well, generative AI can do the framework for me.
Yeah, right? It gets you over the blinking cursor problem. Now, one thing I want to caveat what I just said is do take time to take your holiday. Do take your PTO. And sometimes you do need to listen to yourself and back off just a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That's why I say 15 minutes. Because 15 minutes, especially if you're watching something on television over an hour, that's your commercial breaks, right?
Yeah, it's not and it's the accumulation over time, over and over. It's the consistency. It's not this big, grandiose 16-hour marathon and then never touch it again for a year.
Exactly.
Keith, you
Awesome.
brought up Newton's laws of motion, so I'm going to go with another one, which is change. Staying with the theme of motion, change at most organizations,
Yeah.
especially the large ones, is incredibly hard. There's tons of inertia in these organizations, which just causes them, to stay put. And even though there is a lot of talk of the cloud being the revolutionary thing, everyone is betting big on the cloud, the internal inertia is still incredibly strong. When you meet with different strata of the organization, I'm assuming that you get different messaging and a different understanding and a different execution plan across all of those levels. How does AWS reconcile that aspect of it, which is when leadership says, hey, we are going all in on the cloud, and you get to the bottom layers of the organization, they're like, we are never moving out of this because leadership doesn't know what they're talking about. And I've encountered my share of those situations. How do you guys look at it from an AWS standpoint? And I'm sure you guys encounter some of this as well. How do you think about it? Where in your framework does this fall?
Yeah, I mean, we experience it internally and externally, right? And I think what Amazon has that helps us there is we do have our leadership principles, which act as a framework for us to then, not every single one is going to apply to every single interaction, but we do have dive deep. We do have learn to be curious, right? And so those two I always try to keep in the back of my mind as well as customer obsession, because you're absolutely right. You could have a mandate that we're all in the cloud, right? And that comes from the C-suite. Well, there's layers before you get to the folks that are going to do that implementation, that are going to be responsible for the heavy lifting. And what I see out of successful organizations is you use that iterative strategy that we have that comes from Agile, right? And Agile does get confused in different organizations at times. It doesn't mean that we have the ability to start work on a sprint and then, oh my gosh, we're just going to work on this all of a sudden. I've seen that. I've been a part of that, and that can be disruptive. What I mean by that is you have the ability to plan your work, execute your work, deliver your work, and then ultimately do those retrospectives so that you have the continuous insights and the continuous improvement of that organization. Even when, so for example, I've been going on Twitch. Every single episode we do a debrief, and I bring in the things that we have in the Agile retrospective, and I ask, what can be done better? What can we improve? I guess those are kind of the same thing. But then ultimately, what went well, and then what needs to change? Like, what do we need to stop doing? And an example that I've seen is I was working with a financial client that is a bank essentially made for high depositors, right? And one of the things that they were trying to overcome and solve for is they wanted to take their monolithic architecture and then go to microservices and bring in an event-driven architecture, because the primary problem that they had was someone could go into one of their branches and sign up today, right? We're recording this on a Tuesday, for example. Well, their ETL jobs, and that's extract, transform, and load. And sometimes you'll see ELT, but don't worry about it, same thing. Those run on a certain time window as batch processes, right? So that person that just came in and deposited N dollars, right? We're thinking, okay, they want to immediately start doing something with their money. Their whole account isn't set up until possibly even a week from today, right? And that person wants to start getting ROI immediately, make investments, contribute to their retirement fund, just whatever you can think of with that financial institution. And they're delayed just because of how they've always done things, right? And so that's where things like digital transformation can then come in, which, by the way, as someone that's always been digital, like, I think CDs were out since I can remember, right? And that was like my introduction to digital. I always found, that word to be a little bit funny when people say digital transformation. But it's thinking about how can you transform your business so that you're meeting the needs of your customers and the expectations that folks have in 2023 and beyond.
There's a lot to unpack. I have so many different ways to go with that. It is funny that we think about digital transformation, digital native. I try to explain to my kids, at some point when I was really little, I do remember squeezing a credit card between some carbon paper and a week or a month later, it came out of your account. Right? It's not whenever they got around to running these, pulling up these forms in triplicate and sending it to their bank and all the banks having to do what they do. And now you just tap and it's done if you have the right infrastructure and if your bank can support that.
Right. So
this big project with this financial institution, so do you do it all at once, or what is your recommendation to them? Because that seems like a big jump from monolith to event-driven microservices distributed architecture? How do you guide them through that, and what's the timeline on that look?
Yeah, and before we go into that, let's bookmark, and I want to come back.
Yeah, and how do you get buy-in from everybody?
I
Right? 'Cause
did
there's gonna
want
be a lot of turf in there.
I did want to touch on the carbon paper because in high school, I worked retail, and whenever someone gave us their credit card, we had those imprint machines, so I'd have to like rub it against the carbon paper, and it just blows my mind because like I'll watch my 6-year-old, and he'll be on his tablet or my phone. He's never going to see that unless like we're on holiday and somewhere and the credit machine is down and someone still has those rollers. But the other thing that just blows my mind is in our mobile devices that we have in our pockets today, we have more compute power than they had on the Apollo missions that got to the moon.
Or not just more, but a lot more.
Yeah.
Right.
Very, very true.
And then
The whole Apollo could be a pretty lightweight app that wouldn't even slow your phone down.
And then rewinding to, watching my wife's grandma at 98, we move so fast that sometimes it's hard to think of the fact that like when she was growing up, the state of the art was a telephone. And when I wanted to call someone, like I don't even know if we would have been able to patch Raoul in via telephone if we were doing this back then. But then it was actually physically operated by different operators putting switches into different positions.
Patching those cables.
Yeah, human routers.
And so just remember, please be empathetic to folks because you never know what technology they've seen, what they've been exposed to. And, especially like, I just try to remember this in the back of my mind, right? Something could be brand new to someone today and they're seeing it. So going back to event-driven architecture, decomposing a monolith into microservices, right? You want to go in and do the analysis so that you're doing the decomposition in a manner so that you'll have the right services at the right time. So we're thinking about a project plan over time, and ultimately we're going to go ahead and say like build an account service. That might be the most basic thing that we need to start with. And then once we build that, we're going to go ahead and deploy that account service, and we're going to do it in our lower environments. So we're going to go through dev, test, UAT, whatever have you, right? Sometimes we go straight to QA and then into UAT. Please don't deploy directly to prod. I do it on some of my personal projects, and I'm trying to fix that. It's a bad habit. And then once that's deployed and we can see that it's up and running, then we can do some interesting things with it. We can start slowly feeding it traffic to see what it's going to do over time.
Yeah.
And then we're also going to make some changes in that monolith so that we can handle that load. Maybe we're putting in some feature flags so we can then start decommissioning that service that lives in your monolithic application.
Okay.
Raul, you always talk about finding the seams in the program, right? Where can something be excised and another thing be put in? And that's tricky with the monolith because when you write it, you assume that all these things exist in perpetuity. And so sometimes you have to untangle a little bit to get there.
Absolutely. And then the other thing too is you're decomposing into monolith, or you're decomposing your monolith into microservices. Is microservices need their own data store, right? So when we're doing that, the right way is to then now have an account data store, and then anything having to do with an account is going to go through that service, rather than having every microservice be able to access the account. No, because now we're just creating another mess that we would then have to clean up over time.
Got it. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, Keith. Thank you so much for coming and in, in this indulging us in this conversation. I want to ask one last question as we wrap up. Tell us a little bit about your activities that you've been, performing for the community in terms of the kind of, content you're putting out, any workshops that you're doing, anything that our audience should know and follow.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just a passion area of mine because I truly believe that I stand on the shoulders of giants. Going all the way back to when I first got into software development, I remember, back then I could subscribe to different RSS
Right.
feeds and blogs, and I would just be a continuous learner through that, right? Because if we can learn from someone else's mistakes, hopefully we don't make that mistake ourselves. But you know what? Like, one thing that I heard on the way in was the value of experimentation, right? And some people call it failure. I'm okay with either way. But just continuously do that. Continuously try. Give yourself the power to fail, because when you do that, you're going to have that light bulb moment. We like to call it aha, right? And then what I try to do for every team that I'm on is challenge them to be the best team that they can possibly be. And then, look, I understand that, people move on, they take new roles, they move up. The goal is then to take that to your new team, right? So as you become, maybe you're a senior engineer and you become a manager, right? Well, when I first made that transition, there wasn't a lot of material out there about software engineering management. Thank goodness there is a lot more now. But definitely go and read what others have been through. Learn from their experiences, because it's going to enrich your team when you bring that back in. And then I ultimately try to share my pitfalls. I may not be the best at sharing my answers on Stack Overflow. I kind of end up lurking on something like that. But do try. One of the things that I really want to publish, because I am interacting with so many people that are beginning their cloud journey, is a blog post that talks about the value of certifications. Because, again, coming from a software engineering background, I would hear a lot of the times people would say, well, I have 3 years of experience,
Right.
Doing this, doing that in the cloud. And that's great. Like, there's nothing that beats that hands-on experience. What certification is really great for is now you have something that shows your knowledge base in a given area. And then, especially if you're looking to transition, say, into the cloud, now you have a baseline, right? And I encourage folks from any discipline, as their organization gets into the cloud, think about something like Cloud Essentials, right? And going out and earning that cloud practitioner. Cloud Essentials, for example, you can go on to Skill Builder. It's free to then earn a badge. And that badge is then something that you could say, hey, look, I have a basic understanding. And once you're ready, go and sit the exam for Cloud Practitioner. I did it myself because it gives me the ability to have a common domain language, right? Subject area when I'm having conversations with different folks. I even recommend it for people in finance, in HR, because, again, it allows you to understand where your company is making investments. And especially for folks that are new to this journey, it gives you that ability to say, hey, I understand this, right? And I have the certification and accreditation to back me up.
Got it.
That's really good advice for someone getting started, is to look into certifications and being able to have that milestone and that publicly viewable certificate that you have a certain base level of knowledge and not just knowledge but experience. I mean, they're an experiential program.
Exactly. And like I said, nothing beats experience.
Yeah.
So as I'm studying for my certified specialist in databases, I go through and I'm doing labs. I'm building these things out. So if I start on, say, a video tutorial, I pause a lot. When they say, oh, it's going to be 40 hours, for Keith, that's going to be 80 hours at least.
Right.
Because I want to actually build it, get in, understand everything, because it may not come up tomorrow, but I'll know it and at least have like a pointer in my mind for that advice that I need to give.
Got it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Great.
Oh, well, before we wrap up, you had said you had a demo for us.
I do.
Should we have a quick look, and then that would be really cool. Raul, let me put that on the screen for you. Let's see.
Yep. I see it now.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. So to give you some backstory, and we're just going to do the architecture in terms of time, we do a program called Awesome Builder. And then there's a few different things you have to do. You have to be able to present like it would be that first conversation with the customer that is thinking about AWS. And then we have another meeting where we're now diving deeper, understanding the customer's pain points, and then thinking of a solution. It's a little bit different, right? Because like I'm already starting to think about what I want to build. So that's the conversation gets really directed. And then ultimately it's a presentation of, it culminates with a presentation of what you built, why you built it, and what business problem it's going to solve. So again, thinking about the industry that I cover is technology, media, and telco. I designed an architecture where a customer that has, say, multiple television stations wants to share content between those multiple television stations. Like thinking locally, maybe they have an affiliate here in Seattle, one in Spokane, Washington, and then maybe one in Portland, right? Obviously, with Seattle and Spokane, there's going to be things that are going to be shared, maybe sports or politics. And then, it might be a little bit different from Portland. And then what I designed was a workflow that would do analysis of the video that the affiliate station uploaded. It would run it through recognition. Ultimately, I would sub this out right now for transcribe, because what I originally built it for were some of our leadership principle videos that we have at Amazon. And on those videos, you'll actually have the text for the leadership principle pop up.
Got it.
And then as it goes through that process, it would route the video to the different account of the reviewer team that I had, right? So Learn and Be Curious would go to person A, and then Dive Deep would go to person B. And that's ultimately what we're simulating here. Whereas going with something like transcribe would then just be, now we can pull anything out that was a part of the conversation in that video. And then we're doing cataloging of that video so we understand what came back from the API. Yeah. And we could do that lookup if we wanted to in the future. And then ultimately what this is doing is sending a notification to that panelist from my team where we can do an email. We can even do a text message through SNS.
Yeah.
And then it would notify that panelist that, hey, you have a new video. And then at the beginning, what that first Lambda function is actually doing is it's generating a pre-signed URL so that each panelist would then be able to go and download their own copy of the video, so that if there was something particular, again, in that Seattle, Spokane, Portland, you could do different branding, you could do a different edit of the video, etc., that would meet the requirements for your local affiliate.
Got it. This is a pretty neat pattern
Oh, cool.
for doing this kind of work.
Yeah, thanks.
It's-
It is something that I am also looking at how we can bring that into some of our existing media offerings too.
Got it. That is really cool. Once again, Keith, thank you so much for coming on the show and joining us and sharing your perspectives and sharing another pattern that the audience can actually take away and start working, start playing around with it, tweaking it, and using it for their context. Once again, an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Keith. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Awesome.
Likewise. Thank you.